The mountain man found the obese girl, freezing by the river. What he did next changed everything. The winter of 1847 came to the Montana Territory with a vengeance that old-timers swore they hadn't seen in 30 years. Snow fell in sheets so thick a man couldn't see his hand before his face, and the wind howled through the mountain passes like the devil's own choir. In the small settlement of Timber Ridge, folks huddled close to their fires and prayed for spring. May Thornton stood in the muddy street outside the Rocky Mountain Inn, her few possessions scattered around her feet. The door had just slammed behind her, and the echo of the innkeeper's cruel words still rang in her ears. "You eat more than 3 paying customers combined." Mrs. Becker had shrieked, her face twisted with disgust. "And look at you, you're driving away business. People come here to enjoy their meals, not to lose their appetites watching you stuff your face." The other patrons had laughed cruel, cutting laughter that sliced through May like a winter wind. She had worked at the inn for 3 months, cleaning rooms and washing dishes in exchange for meals and a small room in the attic. She had saved every penny she earned, hoping one day to have enough to move somewhere else, somewhere she might find acceptance. Now those pennies were gone, seized by Mrs. Becker as compensation for the food you've stolen with your gluttony. May had protested, had shown her the careful ledger where she'd recorded every meal, every hour of work, but it made no difference. Mrs. Becker wanted her gone, and in a settlement where the innkeeper held considerable influence, there was no one to turn to. May bent to gather her belongings, a worn carpet bag containing 2 dresses, a hairbrush, and her mother's old scarf. The only thing she had left from before the fever took her parents 5 years ago. The scarf was faded blue calico, soft from years of use, and when May held it close, she could almost smell her mother's lavender soap. "Where will you go?" a voice called from the inn's doorway. It was Sarah, one of the other workers, her face pinched with what might have been sympathy or might have been relief that she wasn't the one being thrown out. May didn't answer. She didn't know. The other boarding houses in Timber Ridge were run by Mrs. Becker's friends, women who shared her views on proper appearance and behavior. The few families who might have taken in a boarder already had full households. And with winter at its peak, there were no wagon trains passing through, no opportunity to work her way to another settlement. She wrapped her mother's scarf around her neck and began walking. The snow crunched under her boots, and her breath formed white clouds in the frigid air. She had no destination in mind, only a desperate need to get away from the laughter, the pointing fingers, the looks of disgust and disdain. The settlement gave way to scattered cabins, and those gave way to forest. May followed the frozen creek that wound through the pines, her feet moving automatically while her mind churned with despair. She had endured cruel words before, had learned to ignore the whispers and stares that followed her wherever she went. But this was different. This was being cast out, stripped of the few coins she'd saved, left with nowhere to go in the dead of winter. The sun was setting when May reached the place where the creek widened into a small river. The water was frozen solid, the ice gray and forbidding under the dimming sky. She sat on a snow-covered log near the bank, exhausted and cold to her core. Her fingers were numb inside her thin gloves, and she couldn't feel her toes anymore. She thought of her mother, who had always told her she was beautiful just as she was. Her mother, who had braided her hair and sung to her and never made her feel like she was too much, too big, too wrong. The tears came then, hot against her frozen cheeks, and May didn't try to stop them. How easy it would be, she thought, to simply lie down in the snow, to let the cold take her, to drift off into sleep and never wake to face another day of shame and rejection. She was so tired of fighting, so tired of pretending that the words didn't hurt, that she was strong enough to endure. The light was nearly gone when she heard the footsteps. Luke Donovan had been trapping in the high country for 3 weeks, and he was ready to get back to civilization or what passed for it in these parts. He had a good haul of beaver pelts packed on his horse, enough to trade for supplies and maybe some tobacco. The trail down from his cabin in the mountains followed the river, and he knew every twist and turn of it, even in the dark. He saw her from 100 yards away, a dark shape hunched on the riverbank. So still, he almost mistook her for a boulder. But boulders didn't wear blue scarves, and they didn't shake with silent sobs. Luke was not a man given to quick action or hasty decisions. Life in the mountains had taught him patience, taught him to observe before acting. But something about the figure by the river, the utter defeat in the curve of her shoulders, the way she seemed to have given up, moved him to action. He dismounted and approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. When he was close enough to see her face, he saw a young woman, maybe 25, with tears frozen on her cheeks and lips blue with cold. Her eyes were closed, and she was whispering something, a prayer, maybe, or a goodbye. "Miss," he said quietly. Her eyes flew open, widening with surprise and fear. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't hold her, and she collapsed back onto the log. Luke moved closer, taking in the situation with a practiced eye. She was dangerously cold, hypothermia setting in. Her possessions were scattered around her, not running away then, but cast out. And the way she looked at him, with terror mixed with resignation, told him she expected nothing good from any man. "You're freezing," he said, stating the obvious because he didn't know what else to say. He shrugged out of his heavy fur-lined coat and draped it around her shoulders. She was too cold to protest, too numb to do anything but huddle into its warmth. "I'm Luke Donovan," he said. "I've got a cabin about 2 miles up the mountain. You need to get warm or you won't see morning." I can't." Her voice was barely a whisper, her words slurred with cold. "Not asking for your life story, miss. Just offering shelter. You can leave when the sun's up if you want." He gathered her belongings and tied them to his saddle, then turned back to her. "Can you walk?" She tried to stand again, and this time he offered his arm. She was unsteady, her movements slow and clumsy, but she managed to stay upright. They walked to his horse, and Luke helped her mount, then swung up behind her. She was shaking so hard he could feel it through his shirt. The ride to his cabin took longer than usual. He kept the horse to a walk, not wanting to jar her more than necessary. She drifted in and out of consciousness, leaning back against him, and he kept one arm around her to hold her steady. His cabin was small but solid, built against the side of the mountain with thick log walls and a stone chimney. He'd built it himself 5 years ago when he'd first come to these mountains, and it had served him well. It was a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a rope bed in one corner, and shelves lined with supplies. Not much to look at, but it was warm and dry and private. Luke helped her down from the horse and half carried her inside. He settled her in one of the chairs close to the fireplace, then set about building up the fire. Soon flames were crackling, filling the cabin with warmth and light. He heated water in his kettle, then mixed cornmeal and a bit of dried venison to make a simple porridge. She watched him with dazed eyes, still wrapped in his coat, still shaking. When the porridge was ready, he handed her a bowl and a spoon. "Eat," he said, slowly. "Your stomach won't thank you if you rush it." She looked at the bowl like it might bite her, then slowly began to eat. Luke busied himself with tending the fire, giving her space, not asking questions. He'd lived alone for 5 years now, preferring the company of mountains and wild things to the noise and complications of people. He wasn't used to conversation, and he sensed she wasn't ready for it anyway. When she'd finished the porridge, he took the bowl and refilled it. This time she didn't hesitate, eating with quiet determination. Some color was returning to her face, and she'd stopped shaking quite so hard. Luke made up his own meal, then sat at the table and ate in silence. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the cabin's corners. Snow began to fall again, heavy and thick. She wouldn't be leaving in the morning, he realized. This storm would keep them both inside for days. When they'd both finished eating, Luke pulled a blanket from his shelf and handed it to her. "Bed's yours," he said, nodding toward the corner. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I can't take your bed," she protested, her voice stronger now. "You can and you will. I've slept in worse places." He saw her about to argue and held up a hand. "Miss, I'm not a man of many words, and I don't need thanks or arguments. You're cold, you're exhausted, and you need rest. Take the bed." She studied him for a long moment, and he met her gaze steadily. Finally, she nodded and moved to the bed. She kept his coat on, wrapped herself in the blanket, and lay down. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into sleep. Luke sat by the fire, watching the flames and listening to the storm. He wondered what had driven her out into the cold, but he didn't let himself dwell on it. Tomorrow would bring its own answers. Tonight she was safe and warm, and that was enough. Morning came late, filtered through heavy clouds and still falling snow. May woke disoriented, unsure for a moment where she was. Then memory returned the river, the cold, the mountain man with the kind eyes and gruff voice. She sat up slowly, her body aching. The cabin was warm, the fire still burning strong. Luke sat at the table, whittling a piece of wood, and he looked up when he heard her move. "Coffee's hot," he said, nodding toward the pot hanging over the fire. "Help yourself." May stood, suddenly self-conscious in the morning light, but Luke had already turned back to his whittling, giving her privacy to compose herself. She found a tin cup on the shelf and poured coffee, then sat in the chair across from him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling fire and the scrape of Luke's knife against wood. Finally, May spoke. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You saved my life." Luke shrugged. Anyone would have done the same. "No," May said firmly. "They wouldn't have. Most people—" She trailed off, looking down at her cup. "Most people what?" Luke's voice was gentle, curious, but not demanding, and so May told him. She told him about Mrs. Becker and the inn, about the cruel words and crueler laughter. She told him about the years of mockery, of being made to feel like her very existence was an offense. She told him about her parents, about the fever that took them, about trying to make her way in a world that had no place for someone like her. Luke listened without interrupting, his knife stilled in his hand. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. "Mrs. Becker took your money?" May nodded. She said it was payment for all the food I'd eaten. But I kept records. I worked for every meal, every night's lodging. I had $17 saved. It was going to be my stake, my way to start somewhere fresh. Luke's jaw tightened, the only sign of the anger he felt. That's theft, plain and simple. Who would believe me over her? May's voice was bitter. She's respected in town. I'm just the fat girl nobody wants around. You're wrong about that, Luke said quietly. You're a woman who deserves respect same as anyone, and what was done to you was wrong. May looked at him in surprise. In her experience, men either ignored her or mocked her. But this man, this silent, solitary mountain man, spoke to her with simple dignity, as if her worth was so obvious it didn't need stating. The storm continued through the day and into the night. Luke showed May where his supplies were kept: flour and cornmeal, dried beans and venison, coffee and sugar. He taught her how to feed the fire properly, how to bank it for the night so it would still have coals in the morning. They cooked together, ate together, and when evening came, May took the bed again while Luke rolled up in a blanket by the fire. The next morning dawned clear and cold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Everything was white and pristine, the trees heavy with powder, the mountains gleaming in the morning sun. After breakfast, Luke stood and reached for his coat. I need to go down to Timber Ridge, he said. Got pelts to trade, and I need to pick up some supplies before the next storm hits. May felt a flutter of panic. You're leaving? Just for the day. I'll be back before dark. He saw the fear in her eyes, and his voice softened. You're safe here, May. No one knows about this cabin but me. Keep the fire going, and there's plenty of food. I'll be back. He paused at the door, then turned back. That money Mrs. Becker took, it was $17. May nodded, confused. All right, then. And with that, he was gone, his tall form disappearing into the white landscape. Luke made good time down the mountain. His horse was sure-footed, used to the terrain, and the trail was clear enough despite the fresh snow. He had business in Timber Ridge, that much was true, but he had other business as well. He stopped first at the trading post, where he sold his pelts and bought supplies. The trader, a grizzled old-timer named Silas, remarked on the size of the haul. Good season for you, Luke. Good enough. Luke counted out coins for his supplies, then added, Heard tell Mrs. Becker runs a boarding house in town. That right? The Rocky Mountain Inn, yeah. Why? Just wondering. Luke gathered his purchases and headed for the inn. The Rocky Mountain Inn was easy to find, a 2-story building on the main street with a painted sign swinging in the breeze. Luke tied his horse outside and walked in. The common room was quiet, just a few patrons eating an early lunch. Mrs. Becker stood behind the counter, a thin woman with a pinched face and calculating eyes. She looked up when Luke entered, and her expression shifted to something approximating pleasantness. Can I help you? Luke walked to the counter and pulled out his coin purse. He counted out $17 in silver and laid it on the counter with careful deliberation. Mrs. Becker looked at the coins, then at Luke, confused. What's this for? Money you took from May Thornton. I'm returning it on her behalf. The color drained from Mrs. Becker's face, then rushed back in an angry flush. That girl has no right. She has every right, Luke said quietly. His voice was low, but something in it made Mrs. Becker step back. She worked for that money same as anyone. You had no right to take it. She ate enough for 3 people. She worked for her meals. You agreed to that arrangement, and you broke it." Luke leaned forward slightly, his eyes cold as winter ice. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to take this money and set it aside. If May Thornton ever comes back to this settlement, you're going to give it to her with an apology, and you're going to spread the word that she's under my protection. Anyone who speaks ill of her, anyone who treats her with anything less than respect, answers to me." "Who do you think you are?" Mrs. Becker sputtered. "Luke Donovan, mountain man, trapper, and a man who keeps his word." He straightened up, his considerable height suddenly very apparent. "I don't come down from the mountains often, Mrs. Becker, but when I do, I hear things. And if I hear that May Thornton's name has been spoken with disrespect, if I hear that anyone in this settlement has done her wrong, I'll be back. And I won't be asking politely. Do we understand each other?" Mrs. Becker swallowed hard and nodded. "Good." Luke touched the brim of his hat. "You have a pleasant day, ma'am." He walked out of the inn and mounted his horse, aware of eyes watching from windows. Let them watch. Let them talk. May Thornton had been treated worse than any human being deserved, and someone needed to stand up for her. If that someone had to be him, so be it. He made one more stop before leaving town at the general store, where he bought fabric, thread, and several other items that made the shopkeeper raise an eyebrow but say nothing. Then he headed back up the mountain, his horse loaded with supplies, his mind already thinking ahead to the long winter months. May had kept the fire burning just as Luke had taught her. She'd also swept the cabin floor, tidied his shelves, and made a stew from dried venison and beans. She told herself she was just trying to be helpful, trying to earn her keep, but the truth was she needed something to do with her hands, something to keep her mind occupied while she waited for him to return. She heard his horse before she saw him, and she hurried to the door. He rode up, looking cold but satisfied, and he had a small smile on his face that transformed his stern features. "Made good time," he said, dismounting. "Storm's coming again tomorrow, but we're set for supplies." May helped him unload, carrying packages inside while he tended to his horse. When everything was inside and the horse was settled in the lean-to Luke had built against the cabin side, they sat down to the stew May had prepared. "This is good," Luke said after the first bite. "Real good." May felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "My mother taught me to cook. She said even simple food could be made special with the right care." Luke nodded. "Your mother was a wise woman." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small cloth bag. He set it on the table and pushed it toward May. "This is yours." May opened the bag and gasped. Inside were silver coins, $17 worth. She looked up at Luke, her eyes wide with shock. "You went to the inn." "I did." "What did you say to her?" Luke shrugged. "Told her the money was yours and she had no right to it. Told her if anyone in that settlement speaks ill of you, they'll answer to me." He met her eyes. "You don't deserve what they did to you, May. You deserve respect, same as anyone." Tears filled May's eyes, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of gratitude, of relief, of something she couldn't quite name. No one had ever stood up for her before. No one had ever made her feel like she mattered. "Thank you," she whispered. "No need for thanks. It was the right thing to do." Luke turned his attention back to his stew, giving her a moment to compose herself. After they'd eaten and cleaned up, Luke pulled out the fabric he'd bought and laid it on the table. "Thought you might be needin' some proper clothes for winter," he said, a bit awkwardly. "The store lady said this was good sturdy stuff. If you know how to sew, there's thread and needles too." May touched the fabric thick wool and dark blue, enough for a dress and maybe a coat. "Luke, I can't accept all this. You've already done so much." "Storm's going to keep us up here for months," Luke said practically. "Can't have you freezing in what you've got. Besides," he added with a hint of a smile, "I've got no use for dress fabric. You'd be doing me a favor taking it off my hands." May laughed, surprising herself. When was the last time she'd laughed? She couldn't remember. But here, in this simple cabin with this taciturn mountain man, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. The storms came and went, dumping snow that buried the world in white. Luke taught May the skills she'd need to survive in the mountains, how to read the weather, how to preserve meat, how to identify edible plants. May cooked and sewed, mended Luke's clothes, and made curtains for the cabin's single window. They talked more as time went on, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams, their regrets. Luke told her about growing up in Ohio, about the restlessness that had driven him west, about finding peace in the silence of the mountains. May told him about her childhood, about her mother's love and her father's steady kindness, about the loneliness that had followed their deaths. As winter deepened, they began to work together on Luke's herb garden. He had a small greenhouse attached to the back of the cabin, heated by the fireplace chimney, where he grew medicinal plants he traded in town. May had a natural talent for it, her hands gentle with the delicate seedlings, her instincts good for what each plant needed. "You've got a gift," Luke said one afternoon, watching her transplant a feverfew seedling. "Never seen anyone take to this so quick." May ducked her head, pleased. "I like working with growing things. They don't judge you. They just need care and attention." "Same as people should be," Luke said quietly. One evening in late January, they sat by the fire after supper. Luke was repairing a trap, and May was sewing a shirt for him. The wind howled outside, but inside it was warm and comfortable. "Can I ask you something?" May said. "Of course." "Why did you help me? You didn't know me. You didn't owe me anything. Why did you stop that day at the river?" Luke was quiet for a long moment, his hands still on the trap. "My sister," he finally said. "I had a sister back in Ohio, Martha. She was like you, bigger than what folks thought was proper. And they were cruel to her, May. So cruel. She tried to be strong, tried not to let it show how much it hurt, but I saw it. I saw what their words did to her." "What happened to her?" "Hung herself in the barn when she was 17. Left a note saying she couldn't take it any more, couldn't face another day of being made to feel like she was less than human." Luke's voice was rough with old pain. "I was 14. Didn't understand why she'd done it. Didn't understand how words could hurt that much. But I grew up, and I saw how people are, and I understood. Too late to help her, but not too late to help someone else." May set down her sewing and crossed to where Luke sat. She put her hand on his shoulder, and he looked up at her with eyes that held a lifetime of regret. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Me too. But when I saw you at that river, saw you giving up the way Martha did, I couldn't walk away, couldn't let it happen again if I had any power to stop it." "You saved me," May said. You saved my life, Luke Donovan, and I'll never forget it." Luke covered her hand with his. "You saved yourself, May. All I did was give you a chance. What you do with it, that's up to you." Spring came late to the mountains that year. It was mid-April before the snow began to melt in earnest, revealing the brown earth beneath. The creek ran high with snow melt, and the first green shoots began to appear. May had changed over the winter. The fear and shame that had hunched her shoulders were gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. She knew her worth now, knew that she was capable and strong. Luke had shown her that through his actions, more than his words, trusting her with the herbs, relying on her skills, treating her as an equal partner in the work of survival. And Luke had changed too. The solitary mountain man who had preferred silence to conversation now found himself talking more, laughing more, enjoying the companionship he'd thought he didn't need. May challenged him in ways no one had in years, questioning his methods, offering new ideas, making him see the world through fresh eyes. One evening in May, as the sun set over the mountains and painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, they sat on the bench Luke had built outside the cabin. The air was warm, filled with the scent of pine and new growth. Birds sang in the trees, celebrating the end of winter. "I've been thinking," May said, "about what comes next." Luke felt his heart sink. He'd known this was coming, had known she would eventually want to leave, to find her own way. But knowing it didn't make it hurt any less. "You want to leave," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "No," May said, surprising him. "I want to stay, if you'll have me." Luke turned to look at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Stay? Here?" "Here, with you." May took a deep breath. "Luke, these past months have been the happiest of my life. I've learned so much, grown so much, and it's because of you, because you saw something in me worth saving. You gave me back my life, and I—" She paused, gathering courage. "I love you. I love this life we've built together. I love the mountains and the herbs and the quiet. I love who I am when I'm with you. And if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I'd like to stay. Not as a guest or a charity case, but as your partner, your wife, if you'll have me." Luke stared at her, speechless. In all his imaginings of how this conversation might go, he'd never expected this. He'd prepared himself for goodbye, for the pain of watching her leave, for returning to his solitary life. "May," he said hoarsely, "I'm a rough man. I don't have much to offer, except this cabin and this life. But if you're willing to take them, they're yours. You're yours. I love you too more than I thought I could love anyone. You brought light back into my life, brought laughter and warmth and hope. I'd be honored if you'd stay, honored if you'd be my wife." May's face broke into a smile as bright as the sunrise. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes." Luke pulled her close and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper as years of loneliness melted away. When they finally broke apart, both were laughing, giddy with joy and relief. "We'll need to go to town," Luke said practically. "Find a preacher to marry us proper." May's smile faltered slightly. "Will they even allow it? Will anyone marry us?" "There's a circuit preacher comes through in June. Old Henry, he's a good man, doesn't care about anything except whether two people love each other. We'll wait for him." Luke took her hand. "And as for the town, let them think what they want. We'll go down, get married, pick up supplies, and come back here. This is our home now, May, ours together." They were married on a bright June morning, with old Henry reading the vows and Silas from the trading post standing as witness. A few townspeople gathered to watch, curiosity overcoming judgment, and to their surprise, they saw a beautiful bride in a blue dress and a groom whose usually stern face was transformed by happiness. Mrs. Becker was not there. She'd left Timber Ridge in March, some said, because business had dropped off after word spread about what she'd done. The new innkeeper was a jovial man from Denver who welcomed all travelers regardless of appearance. Luke and May returned to the mountains as husband and wife, and their life together took on a new richness. They expanded the greenhouse, growing not just medicinal herbs, but vegetables as well. They built a larger cabin with 2 rooms and a real wooden floor. They acquired chickens and a goat, making their small homestead more self-sufficient. 2 years after their wedding, a daughter was born, a healthy, loud baby they named Martha, after Luke's sister. May held the infant and cried tears of joy, marveling that something so perfect could exist in the world. Luke sat beside them, his rough hand gentle on his daughter's soft head, and thanked whatever force had led him to that frozen river on a winter's night. The story of the mountain man and the girl he'd saved spread throughout the territory. Some told it as a curiosity, others as a romance, but everyone agreed on one thing. Love could be found in the most unlikely places, by the most unlikely people. May never forgot the days when she'd been made to feel worthless, but those days were behind her now, transformed into wisdom and compassion. She and Luke took in others who needed help over the years, a runaway teenager, an injured trapper, a widow with nowhere to go. Their cabin became known as a place of refuge, where anyone could find shelter without judgment. On Martha's 5th birthday, as the family celebrated with a cake May had baked and presents Luke had carved, May stood at the cabin door and looked out at the mountains. Luke came to stand beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking about that night at the river," May said, "about how close I came to giving up. And I'm thinking about how grateful I am that you found me, that you saw something in me worth saving." Luke turned her to face him, his eyes serious. "May Donovan, you listen to me. You were never weak, no matter what those people said. You survived things that would have broken a lesser person. You're stronger than this mountain, stronger than anything I've ever known. All I did was give you a chance to see your own strength." May smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We saved each other," she said softly. "You showed me I was worth loving, and I showed you that you didn't have to be alone. We saved each other." Behind them, Martha called for her parents to come cut the cake. They turned together and went back inside, into the warmth and light and love they'd built together, leaving behind the cold and darkness of that long-ago winter night when 2 broken people had found each other and become whole. Years later, when Martha was grown and had children of her own, she would tell them the story of how their grandparents met. She would tell them about the mountain man who saw past society's cruelty to recognize a soul worth saving, and about the woman who had the courage to accept love when it was offered. She would tell them that true strength isn't about size or appearance, but about kindness, compassion, and the willingness to see the worth in every human being. And on cold winter nights, When the wind howled through the mountains and snow fell thick and heavy, Martha would look at her own children and say what her mother had always told her: "We are stronger than we know, and with love we can survive anything." The cabin still stands in those mountains, occupied now by Martha's family, expanded and improved, but still recognizably the home that Luke built and May made beautiful. The greenhouse still grows herbs, and travelers still find refuge there when needed. Some say that on quiet evenings you can still feel the love that started there, a love born from tragedy and kindness, nurtured by respect and partnership, and strong enough to change everything.